Hello everyone, my name is Zenitsu and I'm back with another Digimon spoilers video. So before I go into the spoilers, and oh boy, there's a lot of spoilers. First, I wanted to go over a little bit of news and say that Digimon is holding a voting contest for their 1-year anniversary of the TCG, and basically some of the cards that are going to be voted on are going to make it in BT06 as a parallel rare box topper. So that's just one really nice thing of them to do. And they did limit some of the choices that you have available to you, but I just picked cards that I felt like have some good meta relevancy and are very powerful cards. Obviously, you don't have to pick exactly what I picked, but you can pick whatever you want. I just picked these cards because they are on the higher rarity side, so they're a little bit harder to get, and they're still very powerful cards that still see a lot of play. So that's just what I picked, and again, feel free to pick whatever you want, and I'll have the link down in the description below. So cast your vote and cross your fingers. So, on to the spoilers. First up, we have Black War Greymon. So Black War Greymon is continued to be in black and not purple like I initially thought. So Omnimon's the fact that he could digivolve off of purple is kind of really interesting, considering both Metal Garurumon and Black War Greymon are both black. So that just is what it is. But regardless, Black War Greymon is definitely looking like he is going to be a pretty decent Digimon to be using. So stat-wise, he's not really doing anything too special. He just has your classic 4 to evolve 12,000 DP stat line, so nothing too special there. But he does have 2 really powerful abilities. So his first ability is he just has Security Attack +1. So Black doesn't exactly have that much power to them, so seeing them have some extra instances of Security Attack +1 definitely really increases the overall damage output of the deck, even though traditionally it plays more of like a defensive or chip style, or with the D-Brigade stuff, it definitely has more of an aggro spin to it. So seeing it just have Security Attack +1 is just a nice ability to have. And then on top of that, he even has Reboot. So you could stack this Digimon up to do a whole bunch of different things, and he could fit a whole bunch of different molds, because you could pair him up with a whole bunch of the Reboot synergy abilities. So you could give him an extra instances of Security Attack +1, you could give him jamming, and you could give him some extra DP. Like, there's just so many powerful things you could do with Reboot, and then on top of that, you could even fit him into more of that Reboot blocker mold, because the Black starter deck did give the blocker ability as an inheritable ability, so you could pair him up as a Reboot blocker, and he could fit that mold as well. So he's just looking to be a very flexible Digimon just by having some very powerful keywords. Next, we have Chris Paildramon. So Chris Paildramon isn't really doing anything too special stat-wise. He's just your average blue level 5. But what is really interesting about him is he has a very nice when digivolved ability. So his when digivolved ability is you get to remove 1 evolution source from the bottom of all of the opponent's Digimon. So we already know that Hexablaumon wants all of the opponent's Digimon to have no evolution sources, so that way he could just stunlock the opponent's field and they can't really do much about that. And this card just helps synergize and set up that line of play that much easier. And then on top of that, he just also has synergy with a whole bunch of the other Digimon that don't want the opponent to have Digivolution sources. So he's just really good at removing those evolution sources. Even though it is 1, it is targeting all of the opponent's Digimon, so that's what makes it really good. And then on top of that, he even has a really nice inheritable skill where during your turn, if your opponent has a Digimon with no evolution sources, then this Digimon gets Security Attack +1. So we've kind of already seen this on the Were Garurumon all the way back in the starter deck, and I definitely like the redundancy of abilities because that helps with the deck's consistency if you're looking for this type of ability. And even if you're not, then this ability is still just very good, because blue definitely is in a really interesting position on how it wants to be played. So this incentivizes, again, more of the attacking the inheritable sources, and this is just a really powerful card for just boosting that type of strategy's overall damage output, because it seems like that type of style isn't necessarily so focused on multi-attacks, but even if it is, just that extra instance of Security Attack +1 is still very nice. Next, we have Fusing into the Union of Mega Digimon. So this is a pretty interesting and pretty powerful card. It is a white option card that costs 0 to play, so it is definitely very, very efficient to play. And I don't necessarily know if the white matters or not. It could, but usually white means that it's trying to have some anti-synergy, so that's just one thing to keep in mind. But this card is definitely looking to be very, very powerful and very, very interesting. So the ability of this card is during this turn, the next time you would Digivolve into a level 6 or 7 Digimon, then you get to reduce the evolution by 6. So it essentially is just acting like a hidden potential discovered, where it's just reducing the evolution, which is very, very powerful because you could turbo up into your higher levels that much more efficiently. And then on top of that, it has the drawback of at the end of the turn, the Digimon that you used to evolve is basically returned to the bottom of the deck, and then evolution sources are discarded. So you get to basically cheat on tempo to just be able to play out a very, very big and powerful Digimon, but at the cost of basically losing that Digimon at the end of the turn. So I don't know if this card's going to see a whole lot of play because of that, but still just the idea on being able to just surprise play level 6s and level 7s is just very, very powerful because there's just a lot you could do with level 6s and 7s in the game. So the best way to utilize this card is basically as a good game finisher where you know that level 6 or 7 is going to end up killing the opponent. So that is the best way to use this card because if they're dead, then you don't get the drawback. But another way to mitigate this is using something like Breath of the Gods, where you basically just for 2 make it so that you can't put the Digimon back to the bottom of the deck. But Breath of the Gods definitely synergizes with this card to basically just evolve into any level 6 or 7 for 2. And again, that's just really, really powerful to just cheat on that much tempo. Especially in Black, considering Black has a whole bunch of level 7s that they have access to, and some of their level 6s are also really, really powerful. And then it has the security ability of just adding this card back to your hand. So this is definitely going to be a really, really interesting card to look out for, and a really, really interesting card that could be utilized in a couple of different ways, depending on the deck and color you're playing. Next, we have our first dual tamer. So they previously announced that dual tamers are going to be in the set. So it's basically 2 tamers on 1 tamer card. And the first combination we have is Sora and Joe. So Sora and Joe is a pretty interesting tamer card, not only just because it's our first dual tamer, but it has some very, very powerful abilities. So its first ability is at the start of your turn. If the opponent has a Digimon with no evolution sources, then you gain 2 memory. So this is really solid, especially for the strategy of attacking the opponent's evolution sources, just because you will just be gaining 2 memory for your opponent not having any evolution sources on one of their Digimon. So we've kind of already seen a similar ability like this in the form of the starter deck Matt. So the Matt only gave you 1, and it does nothing else, but it's a more cost-efficient tamer to play. So that's just one really, really interesting aspect of the card. And then on top of this, this even has another ability where during your turn, when one of your blue Digimon attacks, you may rest this tamer and remove the bottom 2 evolution sources off of the opponent's Digimon. So even if you're not playing super heavy into the getting rid of the opponent's evolution sources, this is still just pretty solid of a card to have, just because the opponent could end up just having a card with no evolution sources in play, depending on how the game has been progressing. So its first ability is just really, really solid, and then the second ability just kind of feeds into the first ability, where just you attacking allows you to just be able to remove evolution sources, which is still very, very powerful. Even if you're not necessarily playing into that strategy, it's still very, very good, because taking away some of the opponent's lower end abilities definitely can really help screw up some of their plays. And then it just has the usual security ability of being able to play this card for free if it's checked in your security. So overall, I think this is going to be a really interesting tamer. Traditionally, the 4-cost tamers have been a little bit on the harder side to play, but maybe because these cards are a little bit different than some of the other tamers, maybe they'll end up seeing a lot more play. But I definitely really like what this card is doing, and I definitely think it's really, really powerful of a card to be playing around with. Not only just for the attacking the evolution strategy, but just for blue in general. Next, we have Crusadermon. So Crusadermon is a yellow level 6. Stat-wise, it's not doing anything too special there, but it does have a really nice on attack skill where you get to play a level 3 yellow Digimon or a yellow warrior Digimon from your hand for free. So right now we don't really have a whole bunch of warrior Digimons that are yellow. I think Mistymon is basically it, but the fact that you could still play Mistymon for free is just very, very powerful because he has a nice on-play ability that triggers, and then on top of which, as we've seen with some of the previous cards, Yellow has some really powerful level 3s. There's just so many decent level 3 yellow Digimon that even without a whole bunch of warriors, this card is still very, very powerful to play. And as we saw in the previous meta, that definitely is a very, very viable strategy. And then on top of that, this Digimon has another ability where during both players' turns, for each of your other Digimon, this Digimon gets plus 1000 DP. So the whole point of the card is basically just to make it super buffed and to kind of form this nice go wide strategy, so that way when it checks the opponent's security, it's going to end up living more often than not, just because it is being supported by all of your other Digimon, and then it again is going to be cheating out one Digimon for free, so it's going to be hitting the opponent's security most of the time for 12,000 instead of its base 11,000. And then on top of any other abilities that you could pair up with it, it's just going to be a really, really interesting Digimon to be playing around with if you want to play into that more aggressive yellow style, because they definitely have that, and this is definitely a really interesting card to play around with for that type of strategy. And then the last card on this page is going to be the purple option of Return from Darkness. So this is a 4-cost purple option card, and its main ability is you get to delete one of your purple Digimon, and then you get to play one of your purple Digimon that's level 5 or below from your trash for free, and then it doesn't get its on-play effect. And then its security effect is adding this card to your hand. This card's really interesting because the way Purple has been playing traditionally is you basically use your level 3s as fodder to just use to sacrifice for various abilities, and basically you using this card to essentially level up your level 3 all the way up to potentially a level 5 is still very, very powerful, even though you won't get its on-play ability, so you can't just like sacrifice your Tamers to just res a Skull Greymon, then Skull Greymon's ability would go off. That just doesn't really exist, but the fact that you could still just cheat out a level 5 is still very, very powerful because you could then set up your megas a little bit easier and a little bit more efficiently. And then on top of which, this just has the Anubismon synergy, where the whole idea is like it's coming from your trash, so it's going to gain rush. So if you have enough memory and you can make that line of play, then that line of play is also possible. So I just think this is a pretty interesting card. Whether it'll see a whole lot of play is to be determined, but it's definitely a card that you shouldn't be sleeping on. Next up, we have Weedmon. So Weedmon is a pretty solid Digimon. Stat-wise, it's basically exactly the same as Vegemon, except its DP is cut in half. So I don't necessarily think that matters too much considering what you're trying to utilize this card for. But it having an evo cost of 1 is definitely really, really nice on a green level 4 Digimon. What you're really trying to gain out of this card is its inheritable skill, which is very, very powerful. So its inheritable skill is during your turn, when this card is trashed by the Digiburst ability, then you gain 1 memory. So green, for at least the past set and the starter deck, has been playing around with the Digiburst ability a lot more, and this definitely is a really good card to play around with for those Digiburst abilities, just because you're going to be gaining 1 memory out of Digibursting. So this is just a really solid Digimon to have for a lot of those strategies, and a lot of those strategies are played, so I think this card is going to see a decent amount of play. Next up, we have Omnishoutmon. So Omnishoutmon is a pretty solid red level 5 Digimon. Stat-wise, it's doing absolutely nothing we haven't seen before, but its ability definitely is really interesting to note, where you could Digivolve this card off of your Shoutmon for 4 and ignore the evolution conditions. So it's not as powerful or great as a warp as we've seen before with Itmon into Beelzemon, but the fact that basically the way that they're treating warps, where it's like you just pay 4 and then go straight into this, is still really, really interesting, because it still can lead to a lot of like just surprises where they just have to be very, very conscious of your Shoutmon now. And that's just, again, really, really interesting into the whole like mind games aspect of what are they going to use their Shoutmon for? Are they going to use it to just Digivolve up traditionally, or are they going to warp into Omnishoutmon? That's just already pretty solid of an ability to have. And then on top of that, he has a very, very nice inheritable skill where during your turn, when this Digimon has Shingeki or Blitz, then it gains Security Attack +1. So we already knew that Shoutmon wants to play with the Blitz ability, so this essentially will help give anything with Blitz or Shingeki. Security Attack +1 is really, really powerful. And then as we saw with the new Omnimon, you could basically hit for like 4 or 5 security in one go because you like use this Digivolve up into Shoutmon DX, and then you Shoutmon DX's ability, put like another level 6 from your hand into his evolution source, and then you swing, hit like 2 or 3 security, then Digivolve into Omnimon, and then Omnimon's ability will make him active and you could swing again. Just makes it a very, very powerful Digimon to utilize for that whole strategy. So I definitely think Omnishoutmon is definitely looking to be a pretty solid Digimon for that deck. Next up, we have another blue option card. This time it is Absolute Blast. So Absolute Blast is a 6-cost blue option card, and its main ability is that you get to trash one of the Evo cards off the bottom of one of your opponent's Digimon, and then return one of the opponent's Digimon without any evolution sources back to the bottom of the deck. So blue hasn't really been playing a whole lot with bot decking. Most of the time it's been playing around with bouncing. So the fact that they have a really solid form of removal is just, again, really, really good. This could target both the same Digimon, or you could utilize this ability to like split it up to where it's like, okay, I'm going to get rid of the ability off of one, and then your, let's just say Puppetmon as an example, like your Digimon with no evolution sources will just go to the bottom of the deck. So this is just a pretty solid removal card for blue, and blue definitely really needs some good removal options because they just really haven't had any. And then its security effect is activating its main effect, so you could use this in some really, really devastating ways just because its main effect is pretty solid as a whole. Next up, we have Taktimon. So Taktimon is just your average purple level 6. So stat-wise, he's doing really nothing too special there, but he does have a really interesting when attacking ability where you get to activate one of the following abilities, and then if you have no other Digimon in play, then you get to activate all of the abilities instead. So just the modal feature is really, really nice, and then the fact that if he's alone, you get all of them is also really, really nice. But the 3 abilities that you have to pick from is you could either gain 1 memory, you could either have this Digimon gain plus 2000 DP for the turn, or you could delete 3 of your opponent's level 3 Digimon. So this is just a very, very powerful card, especially alone, but just being able to pick which options you want when you need it is still, again, a very, very powerful aspect of the card. I definitely think that this card's going to be really, really solid, just because purple is going to be sacrificing so many cards, because you could play this with something like the purple Were Garurumon or the purple black metal Growlmon, so that way you can make him active and then gain this ability again. So it's just a very, very powerful card that has a lot of really good abilities that you could utilize in different ways. Next, we have another dual tamer. So this time it is going to be the combination of Tai and Matt, and this card is looking to be a pretty interesting card. So it has 2 big abilities. Its first one is at the start of your turn, when your opponent has a level 6 or above Digimon, you gain 2 memory. So that's pretty solid because a lot of decks rely on their level 6s or level 7s to try to aggress, and you're just going to be gaining memory for them trying to do that line of play. So that's really interesting to think about. And then on top of which, they have another ability where during your turn, all Omnimons on your field gain Security Attack +1. So that ability is really only good for an Omnimon-based deck, but Omnimon in all of his forms is still a very, very powerful Digimon, which means this card can go into a whole bunch of different decks. Even though it is a white tamer card, and white generally is trying to be the anti-synergy card, it's still a really, really good card for those Omnimon decks, just because it's trying to interact with the only card that really matters in those decks, which is Omnimon. So I definitely think this is going to be a pretty interesting tamer to be played around with if you're playing an Omnimon-based deck, and Omnimon already can go into a whole bunch of different decks, so that means this card could see a whole bunch of potential play. But it does look like the dual tamers are following a kind of similar pattern, where their first ability will gain U2 memory for the opponent having something or not having something. So that's just one thing to see if that trend is going to continue into some of the other tamers. So only time will tell, but that's just what it looks like they're going to all start out as. Kind of similar to how the other 4-cost tamers all have this memory fixing ability. This just has a memory gaining ability for the opponent having something or not having something. Next up, we have Metal Greymon Alteris mode. We already knew that this card was going to be in the set. We just didn't exactly know what it was going to be doing, and now that we do know what it's going to be doing, it definitely is looking like it's going to be a really interesting card. Its stat-wise is not anything too special, except it does have the ability to Digivolve off of a level 5 Digimon for only 1 memory. So you could go like Metal Greymon into Metal Greymon Alteris mode, and that'll only cost 1 memory. So you could just extend your level 5s a little bit longer. He does have some slightly higher DP compared to some of the other level 5s in the game. So that's just one other important thing to note, is he has 8,000, where a lot of the others will have 7,000 or less. Unless they're vanilla, then sometimes they can hit up to 10,000, but regardless, he's just a very, very powerful level 5 to be playing around with. And then he has a when evolving ability on top of that, where this Digimon has a Metal Greymon in its evolution source. You get to delete one of the opponent's Digimon with 4,000 DP or less. So again, the whole idea is to Digivolve this on top of a Metal Greymon. So its removal ability is a little bit on the weaker side, but that's totally okay because removal is always good. And then on top of which, it has a nice inheritable skill where during your turn, when this Digimon has Greymon or Omnimon in its name, then it gets plus 2,000 DP. So we've kind of already seen this effect before, where it's just doing your whole DP boost based on name, so nothing too special there. But the fact that we now have a level 5 that can Digivolve off of a level 5, similar to how Shoutmon DX was a level 6 that could evolve off of a level 6, is still something very, very interesting to be playing around with design-wise. Next, we have Weregarurumon Sagittarius mode. So this is basically doing almost the exact same thing as the Metal Greymon Alteris mode in terms of how this card is going to function. So it is stat-wise the exact same as Metal Greymon, except this time it's in blue, and then it also can evolve off of level 5s for 1. That's just one big part of how the card is going to be working, and then on top of which it has its own ability where during your turn, if this card has a Weregarurumon in its evolution source, then it gains jamming. So I do think the just innate ability of the Weregarurumon is a little bit better than the Metal Greymon, just because blue has so many different ways of interacting with jamming, and jamming is still a very, very powerful ability to have, that I just think this card's going to be pretty solid just from that ability alone. Yes, you do have to Digivolve it off of a Weregarurumon, but we already have some pretty solid Weregarurumons that you kind of just want to utilize anyway. One big example would be like the starter deck Weregarurumon, where it will actually gain Security Attack +1. So a jamming with Security Attack +1 is just really, really solid of an idea to be playing around with, especially if you're using this to like attack the opponent's evolution sources, or trying to like build a go wide strategy and interact with jamming. So I just think this is a pretty solid card just off of that ability alone. And then its inheritable skill is during both players' turns. If this card has Garurumon or Omnimon in its name, then it just gets plus 1,000 DP. So this is almost like a permanent buff of plus 1,000 DP, so it does work on the opponent's turn. So this just means that whatever Garurumon or Omnimon you're going to be using is just going to naturally be plus 1,000 DP more than what your opponent is expecting to deal with. Overall, I think this card is going to be really, really solid, and I definitely like this version a lot more than the Metal Greymon, but the Metal Greymon is still pretty solid of an ability to have just because it has the flexibility of building a really, really large stack, and it's still acting as some removal, even though the removal is a little bit on the toned down side compared to what I would like it to have, and compared to something like a Chimeramon, but still, both of those cards are doing some very, very similar things, and they're both very, very good in their own ways. And then the last card that we got spoiled for today is Reflectimon. So this is a really, really interesting Digimon just because she's doing something very similar to Shoutmon DX, where she could also evolve off of a level 6. But as a level 6, just evolving off of a level 5, she's just doing nothing special there in terms of her stats. But again, the fact that she could Digivolve off of a level 6 is still very, very interesting. And then on top of which, she has a main ability of Digiburst 2, where all of your Digimon gain plus 2000 DP for the turn. So just being able to DP boost in green is pretty solid, just because you really need your Digimon to be bigger than the opponent's Digimon, so that way you could easily beat them up and easily clear security checks. So she's pretty good for that. And then on top of which, she also has another ability where during your turn, once per turn, when a Digimon uses Digiburst, one of your opponent's Digimon can't block or attack until the end of the opponent's next turn. So not only does she help you aggress, she also helps you defend, because you are going to be using her Digiburst ability to also stunlock one of the opponent's Digimon down. So this is just pretty solid, considering green already has a whole bunch of really solid Digiburst cards that they want to be interacting with, and the fact that she does just evolve off of a level 6 means that you could just Digivolve her like into another one of her, use her Digiburst ability, then Digivolve again, and use that Digiburst ability again. So it's just a really, really solid line of play, just trying to line up extra Digibursts to just continuously stunlock the opponent's Digimon down. So she's definitely a really interesting card. So I'm not exactly sure how good this card is going to end up being, but it's definitely a really, really fun card to think about, just because you have a level 6 that could evolve off of a level 6. So I think she's definitely going to be an interesting card. I just don't know how played she's actually going to be. So that's all of the spoilers that we got today. I know it was a really big bunch, but we also got some news that some other cards are going to be reprinted. So that's always nice seeing some alt art reprints. But in terms of what the set is doing, I still think that this set is going to be a really, really interesting set. Even though we did get to see a lot of really, really powerful cards, there wasn't anything like super standout as like insanely broken. Everything just feels like it's just trying to synergize with one another, creating some new decks, updating some old decks, and just being some really, really interesting tools to think about using. So I'm definitely really excited to see where the rest of the set goes. And I definitely think what we've seen are all very, very powerful and very, very interesting cards. So that's all I really have for this video. As always, feel free to tell me your thoughts down in the comments below. And as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content. And I'll see you in the next video.